Small businesses are evolving in Summit County. Tourism has always led the business ecosystem in mountain towns, but the market is changing with more telecommuters than ever before and new year-round opportunities. Local small business expert Jack Taylor says 80% of startups in the U.S. go belly up after 5 years. Those odds are steep, and success begins with planning, but planning does not end during boom times. Right now is the best time to reassess your business plan, whether you're a one-person tech startup or a nonprofit struggling with grant funding. Krystal 93 invited Taylor to the studio for an in-depth look at how small business has changed over the years in Summit and what you can do now to prepare for the inevitable lean times. Phil Lindeman, Krystal 93 News Director, in the studio today with Jack Taylor. He is a local small business expert. Jack, thanks for coming in to talk.
Oh, my pleasure, Phil. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to have you in here. And we are talking a little bit about Small Business 101 in the mountains. We were, just discussing how in the mountains, the challenges people run into are kind of magnified by the fact that we are a smaller community, resources, all that sort of stuff. And you have been working in the mountains with small business, government, nonprofits for a very long time, almost 30 years.
I have, and I started here back in '89 with the Keystone Center, and was their vice president for finance and operations. And since then, started a nonprofit organization that did community mediation, and then did about a 10-year stint as a consultant with small business as well as with nonprofits and local government on strategic planning and conflict management.
Okay, great. And when you started at the Keystone Center, what was the environment? What was the business environment like in Summit County at that time?
The business environment was not really that much different than it is today, except that we're looking at bigger scale today. But back then, the primary economic driver is tourism. Mm-hmm. And so for resorts as well as for small businesses, it was about how do we get people in the door? How do we make sure that we're taking care of our customers?
Yeah, and I would imagine not just people who live here, but people who are coming here and trying to get them to remember us and think about us even when they're not on vacation.
Exactly. Spending
their 2 weeks out of the year here in Summit County.
Exactly. The big challenge was how do you make sure that people know about you before they get here? And that has changed dramatically, really, in probably the last 5 years. There are a lot of people that are going online to get their information. And so if you don't have an online presence, you have a problem.
Yeah, like you said, I would imagine that lots of things have changed, even though the businesses are still similar. Tourist economy up here. It's a little bit more of a year-round tourist economy than it was in the 80s.
Absolutely.
When did you start seeing that switch, personally, you?
I think that I saw it in the early 2000s. Okay. Was when we really started to see a little bit more in terms of local economy growth. That said, there was a housing study done, I think about 5 or 6 years ago now, by Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, looking at second homes. And 2/3 of the living units in Summit County are second homes.
Yeah, it's wild when you see some of those stats about how many of those homes really do either sit empty or mostly empty for most of the year. And property up here is prime.
It is absolutely prime.
Yeah. So it is wild to think that at the same time a business, how a business owner is going to reach a lot of those folks who are only here, a short portion of their time. And through the years, you've also been director at some business centers as well. Where else were you after the Keystone Center?
Well, after most of my small business experience started with the Small Business Development Center, and that's a statewide organization. And Colorado Mountain College in Summit was the host for the Northwest region, and it was a 10-county region. And that was absolutely during the height of the recession, and was working with small businesses, really trying to help them survive, but also talking with people about startups.
When the recession hit, what were some of the biggest challenges that small businesses were facing simply to keep their doors open?
Cash. cash flow, and a lot of small businesses got themselves into some real problems with debt. And servicing that debt, I had one gentleman that contacted me and said, I really need some help getting a loan to consolidate my debt. I've got some credit card debt. And I said, really, how much? He said, last week it was $130,000. So at 17% interest, it's hard to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, it's hard to get out of that hole once you're already found yourself deep inside of it. So businesses were struggling a little bit just with the fact that business was hard to come by at that time. What businesses were succeeding, or which ones were weathering the recession better than others?
Businesses that had a plan. Okay. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of that. That said, plans change, and they're fluid tools to be used. However, if you don't really think about what it is you're trying to do moving forward, what is your goal, then your business is already behind the 8 ball.
Okay, and that's important for any business, whether they're here in the mountains or anywhere. You always got to have kind of that looking ahead, seeing where you're going.
That's exactly right. You really need to have an idea of where you want to go, and that's what really sets you up for setting up strategies that will get you ahead. And then as things change, you have to make adjustments to those strategies. An example is the online world of economics now. There were back in the early 2000s. There wasn't a lot of online presence, and now just about everybody has one. And if you don't have one, you better be thinking about getting one.
Yeah, it's wild how fast that changed. I mean, sure, the recession. For some of us seems like a long time ago, but we aren't far from the recession, and we aren't far from, like you said, the early 2000s, where business was still primarily done with yellow pages and with print product and stuff that people could touch and feel like they had for decades and decades.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, massive seismic shift. The businesses that you found have really embraced and done well with an online presence. What are they doing? What are they doing different, or what are they doing just better than those who haven't latched on?
Well, they're locking into to the technology wave is really what I'm seeing. We've had some of the growth that we've seen outside of the tourism sectors has to do with technology, and people with their online businesses, people that are writing code and doing all kinds of programming for different apps that are being developed. And we're seeing a growth of that here in Summit County. We've got 2 co-workspaces up here in Evo 3 and in Elevate CoSpace that are primarily occupied by tech businesses starting up. So we're talking about 1- and 2-person shops that are just getting underway, getting themselves in a position where at some point down the road they might be able to move into their own space or do some other things that they can't do without the help of that co-space. So that's really a huge piece of the puzzle for Summit County.
Yeah, and I remember when those were starting to build momentum, especially down, I remember hearing about like Galvanize and some of the ones down in Denver in the Front Range,
right.
And then they just exploded, and then it kind of came up here. And when I first started hearing about them, I wasn't sure if the concept would survive, if people wanted to share an office with 10 of their closest friends, competitors, really, is what they end up being in that space sometimes. But they're thriving, they're surviving, because I think a lot of telecommuters and a lot of people who work from home still do like having that space.
Well, it's important to have that kind of interaction with people that are like-minded, people that are going through some of the same challenges. You can talk to one another about, let's share ideas about how we do this stuff moving forward. And it's a huge advantage. I can tell you for a while, I had my own thing going on, and I was by myself. Mm-hmm. And I found that I was really learning a lot more about the needs of people that were out there, the more that I got out and just talked with folks about the kinds of challenges that they were facing. And so having like-minded people in the same building really works out pretty well.
It's hard to operate in a vacuum, especially if you're trying to do a small business, because there's not only, the fact that you're trying to run your own business, you're also trying to grow and develop and, improve. Can't really do that in a vacuum.
No, you really can't.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Now, when we were talking a few weeks ago, there was just a small business workshop put on by the Summit Chamber and Summit County, and it was actually on July 25th, and talking about the planning for success. Like you said, you got to have a roadmap. You've got to have a way to get there. And one of the things that you guys did was remind me the name of it again. You guys were doing kind of working through a visualization of.
Well, we were helping people work through plans, and it was really a small business development template that we had people using. It's called the business plan canvas.
Canvas, that's what I was looking. I was going to say mural, but I just couldn't think of what it was for a second. But yeah, the business plan canvas. Describe what that is.
Well, the canvas is really like a one sheet that breaks out the specific kinds of things that business owners really need to be thinking about in terms of overall relationships, who are the people that they really need to help them get launched, what kinds of skill sets are required to get them down the road, and what strategies, what activities then are going to help them to move in the right direction. And I've seen a lot of business plan templates over the years. This is the easiest, most accessible, and you can get at it for free at strategizer.com. And it's a great opportunity to if you've got 2 or 3 people that you're working with, to sit down with that canvas and really start to talk about what is it that we need to do for success? Who do we need to know and why?
Great. And it's good for businesses of any type, even. Like you said, it could be good for somebody who's starting a clothing company or somebody who is an app developer or anything in any market almost. And
really any organization. You don't even really have to be a business. You can be a nonprofit organization. You can be a local government, but sitting down and actually working through what are the major aspects of this it's really enlightening, especially when you can do it with your teammates.
Absolutely. And bringing that back to mountain town businesses, what are some things that you have found mountain town businesses are facing that you might not face in Metro Denver? What are some challenges that are specific to our area?
Well, we have a different demographic here than most areas. Most areas are there's like a bell curve for the age of the population. There are a lot more diverse occupations, and we don't really see that same diversity up here. And so, when you're looking at a workforce that might not have some of the specific kinds of skill sets that you need to be able to really launch the kind of business that you're trying to launch. And then it's a question of, so how do you attract those folks? And along the line is, if I attract them and they don't live here, where do they live?
Yeah, where do they live? How do they afford one of those homes that's not a second home already? Well, and I would imagine also one of the issues that you run into is that since the type of markets up here are a little more restricted, like you said, not quite as diverse, that you're running into people who are already, or other businesses who have already been at it for a while, that might already have the market a little cornered. I'm thinking of somebody who might want to start a business, a property management company. That's going to be tough to get into property management because there's already the need has been filled, or it seems as though the need's been filled.
Well, and in those cases, it's important for you to communicate what it is that makes you different from everyone else. And hopefully that difference that you're communicating is something that is of value to the person that you're trying to reach. And so, in the property management world, there are a bunch of different folks up here who are doing that kind of work. And some of them, I know one in particular that they offer coffee to folks that are coming in, and so they have little packages for arriving guests that have different kinds of things in there like that.
Okay, just those little touches, just something to make somebody remember you, or to make somebody think, you know what, I really enjoyed what they did. And I remember I was just reading an article not long ago about the top 5 restaurants in the U.S., not top 5 rated, but top 5 restaurants in terms of just the amount of money that they make. And the thing that they came back to over and over again, the reason they do so well, is customer service.
Well, and that actually has to then also expand onto the kinds of service that you're doing for your employees. If you're a small business owner, one of the most important things is making sure that you're treating your people the way that they would expect to be treated, so that they're growing and that they want to stay. I saw a statistic not long ago that 70% of people who leave jobs in 24 months or less will say that the reason they left was because of the way they were treated. So it wasn't necessarily that they found a higher paying job. Some of them did, obviously, but it was really about the way they were treated.
Yeah, and that's wild, but it doesn't seem that unusual. I mean, I would think of the jobs that I've had, the ones that I just did not enjoy the boss or the people I was with, or the benefits weren't good. They're not the ones that I stuck at, and they're definitely not the ones that I remember to this day. It's the good jobs that I had that I will remember, and that I remember growing too.
Right.
And that's probably another part of it too, is that as a small business owner, you want to provide not just take care of your employees, but also provide them growth.
Well, you have to do that, and one of the fears that I've heard vocalized around is, well, what if I spend this time training them and then they leave anyway? And there's a saying that's out there on Facebook where there was a conversation between a CEO and a CFO, chief financial officer, and the chief financial officer says, well, what if I spend this money on training and they leave? And the CFO says, or the CEO says, and what if we don't and they stay?
Good point. Yeah, that's the truth. And I'm sure when you're looking at a bottom line, sometimes it can be difficult to make that decision.
Well, it can be. And that's where the planning side of this is so critically important. And in particular, and this won't be a surprise to you because of my finance background, you have to be looking at the financial aspect of the job, primarily cash flow. It's really not so much about your balance sheet. It's really not so much about your income statement. It's about cash flow. When are dollars coming in? When are dollars going out? And if there are gaps, how do you fill them? And finding the best way to make that happen. But you want to make sure that you're doing that before you actually need the cash. There are a lot of folks that wait till the very last minute, and then they go to the bank and they've got themselves in some deep trouble, and their financial statements make it look like they're in deep trouble, and any lender is going to back away from that a little bit. It's really important in the overall scheme of things to really have a good relationship with your bank before you really need them.
And like you said, not wait until you're in the hole to try and get back out of it. Over time with small businesses or even governments, nonprofits, are there any trends that you've seen, for ones that are either very successful or ones that just cannot succeed? Any things that they all share in common?
Well, the successful ones are ones that are looking ahead at different what-if scenarios. And so, you might be cruising along and things are going really well. You have to start to ask yourself, what if this changed? What if all of a sudden 10% fewer customers are showing up, or those that are showing up are spending less money? What happens then? And you need to look through what adjustments would I need to make to my business in order to increase its likelihood of survival in that kind of a situation. And so you have that plan kind of sitting off on a shelf for the day that that's going to come, and it is going to come.
And right now is probably a good time to be doing that. I would imagine boom times are the best time to be, because you're not worried about making things run day to day.
Exactly.
You can look ahead.
Exactly. You really have to be doing this pretty regularly, and that's what successful organizations are doing. They're not necessarily resting on their laurels, but they're also not panicking when things get rough, because they've already thought about, okay, this is what we really need to do.
Great. And then finally, when it comes to nonprofits, because that's a side of things I'm interested in, because it seems like there are some nonprofits popping up across the county, and luckily they've been able to find some support from the county. Does county and municipal support for nonprofits, does that tend to wax and wane, or can nonprofits usually find a little bit of help, a little bit of support from a government body?
Well, they'll find support from government bodies if they're providing a service that the government is looking to provide for the citizens, but doesn't necessarily want to staff up to do that.
Okay.
And our not-for-profit community in Summit County is pretty large. We have quite a few nonprofit organizations, and they are, the biggest challenge for them is keeping the funding that they have, because some of those funders will tend to cycle in and out.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, it's looking at ways to make sure that they can deliver the services that they're delivering with the least cost. And that can be an operational challenge for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned that funding sources come and go, especially in the nonprofit world, and that's something that I've very much been hearing from nonprofits right here in town. The FERC is one that comes to mind immediately, that they had a lot of federal grants that they relied on and that they really did enjoy for some of their funding, and those are gone.
Well, I had that happen personally. I started a community mediation program, started a nonprofit called the Rocky Mountain Resource Center. And we had a community mediation program that was funded, federally funded. And I knew in my soul that federal funding was probably going to go away at some point, but I wasn't really sure how to replace it. And I did go to the towns and to the county asking if there was some support for this program, because it was helping law enforcement. There are a lot of calls that go out where a crime's not yet been committed, but there's a dispute between neighbors. Barking dogs is a big one. And we would go out and take care of those, and that freed up law enforcement to do other things that they needed to be doing. And I was told, if we've got the resources, we'll definitely back this up. Well, the program, federal funding went away at a time when sales tax revenues were flat, and therefore it was impossible to keep the program funded. So I fully understand what that's like in the not-for-profit community, and that's why you always have to keep your radar up about where are the potential opportunities to get funding for our programs. Are they other government programs that are giving grants? Do we need to find individual donors? And the most successful nonprofit organizations have a real mix of those things. So they're not just depending on one source all the time.
Gotcha. They got a little bit of that diversity going on with their where the money's coming from.
Yeah.
When was the Rocky Mountain Resource Center? When was that around?
That was 97 through 2003.
Okay, so you guys, you did have a couple years under your belt until things started to dry up and some of that federal funding went away.
That's right.
Okay. Finally, big pieces of advice, blanket advice that you would have for anyone, nonprofit, small business, government, right now, in boom times, in the mountains, while things are looking rosy. What's your best advice?
Well, my best advice is to really sit down and look at the great detail of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and the business that you're in, what are the overall markets, and do not ever make the assumption that things are never going to change, because they will. They obviously they've done quite a bit of that just in the last few years, but even over the last couple of decades, things have really kind of changed around up here.
Yeah.
So, the planning side of it is incredibly important, but even more important than that is execution. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that, we write this incredible plan and it gets put on a shelf somewhere, and, every few months somebody picks it up and looks at it. That's not the way that you need to move forward with your business.
Yeah, that's the truth. And when I was doing one of my past jobs I had was doing a lot of startup reporting on startups and tech businesses in Denver. And that was one of the big hurdles that they ran into is, these startup days, their startup weekends. People get really excited, really into it, really just jazzed about what they're doing. And then, like you said, nobody follows through. They expect the plan to take care of itself, and that doesn't happen.
Well, they do, and the sad part about it is that we've got some people who have incredible skills at the services that they want to provide, but they don't know how to run a business. And so I know, and I've got good friends that are in business, and they really have never planned for anything. And it seems like they're always chasing their tail. Mm-hmm. And it's not that tough to sit down and actually work through what you can do on the business plan canvas. And just ask yourself all the right questions about who are my customers. And the worst answer you can give to that question is, anybody with a pulse. That's you really need to focus in on what sector is it that's going to be the biggest sector for what it is you're providing, and then you move forward from there. And part of that, the big part of that is, so where do those people go to get their information? And then you want to make sure that you're in that environment.
Great. Yeah, make it as easy as possible for people to find what you're doing, because hopefully what you're doing is well thought out and fills a need that's out there in the community.
Well, exactly right. And as long as you're really working against your plan, you can see pretty quickly whether or not things are unfolding the way you thought they would. You're going to make some assumptions about how things move forward. You'll find out, if you're really looking at it, whether or not those assumptions are on. And if they're not on, then you need to make adjustments to what it is you're doing to make sure you're succeeding.
Great. Well, Jack, thanks again for making time to come in and talk a little bit about small business and planning and preparation for the future, whether you're a nonprofit, government, or just getting your business going. Well,
thanks for having me, Phil. I really do appreciate it. And, I don't know if it's appropriate to say, but the Summit County Chamber is an excellent place to network with like-minded people that are really looking to serve this community.
Yeah, again, making sure that you're not in a vacuum as you're trying to get something started. There's help out there, and people like yourself who have been there, done that.
Exactly.
And are still doing it to this day. Great. Well, Jack Taylor, thanks again.
Thank you, Phil.
Of course. Jack Taylor talking small business on Krystal 93.